Hello, everyone. So thanks for bringing me up to this conference, and I really appreciate that. Today we're gonna talk about the DevOps, uh, like from the perspective of the culture and from the perspective actually the way the whole company goes. And here during this talk, I will try to explain why is it barely possible to just stick to the cloud and the cutting edge technologies and think that only that way we'll approach DevOps. So why is it actually not enough? I'm basically going to cover my talk by experience on companies that I'm working on. So currently I'm working on a Berlin-based company called TaxFix. We're literally fixing taxes, making the tax declaration easy to fill. But this is not going to be the talk about my journey in taxes because I joined the company basically 1 month ago. This is going to be the talk about my previous experience because even if you work in different companies, the issue of DevOps and the issue of like the communication, collaboration between Dev and Ops stay the same. And it's very, very interesting. So yeah, here I'm gonna focus on 3 crucial things to cover this topic. First one is terminology. I think it's kind of like really trivial to say that the DevOps is not an engineer. Of course, I think basically most of the people know that it's not. But I'm also going to dive deeper into this topic and how do we perceive the terminology of what the DevOps is between like how do evangelists see it and how do companies see it. The second one is reality. So here I'm going to talk about like what we face if we just put a technology in front of the culture and process and what will actually happen in the future. So I mean, it's rather the reflection than the future. So in the last topic, I'm going to talk about how could we avoid the problems to happen. So terminology. So how do we understand the DevOps and like what's the difference between our understanding of DevOps and understanding of DevOps on the business side? So first of all, I mean, I would like to come over the topic of what DevOps actually is, right? Because and for me, it's really tricky to answer what the DevOps actually is because once you're like, going to do just simple Google search, what is DevOps? We're going to go like to like most of the companies' definitions that actually develop the product with a reason to sell you, and their definition of DevOps is actually lies on the ground of their own interest. So actually, I got a really good quote from the Jin Kim's interview, from one of his interviews. So the Jin Kim is a guy who like made a Project Phoenix book, who made a DevOps handbook. So he's actually the major evangelist of the DevOps movement. And he basically said that DevOps is the way of building software for technology companies. And how do I understand that term? So here I want to stick to the keyword way. So why is it important? Because the DevOps is not, even the culture is not a methodology, it's not a process, it's the way. Because for me, the way is actually the path the whole company should go, not just one engineer or department, right? Also, the way is not a one-time hop. It's a continuous journey of improvements, reflections, mistakes, and lessons learned. So this is actually very important to understand, and it covers the idea that it's not something that one engineer or one head of management can bring you. It's something that you have to collaborate around and insist on and actually try to flourish the more or less equal contribution from all sides of the software development. So how do how do evangelists see the DevOps? So here I'm basically going to cover the abbreviature called COMS: culture, automation, layout, measurement, and sharing. This basically lays on the ground of the theory of what DevOps is. So when we talk about culture, we mean focusing on people and collaboration. We mean removing the wall between developments and ops guys. Automation is something that we know the most about the DevOps, so we would like to delegate the routine to computers and make it versioned, repeatable, basically boring. The link, emphasizing the value stream to end users. So I mean, like if we talk about what the lean is, we basically talk about the transition from the term called project to product. So in a product, basically the ideal setup of how the product organization works is that every employee should focus on like delivering the values, delivering something to the end user, the user actually needs. And measurement. So here we're emphasizing the feedback from metrics. So instead of like sticking to the idea of like making something the best, like the best technologies, the best culture, like, like the most friendly ever. Basically, the ideal setup of the DevOps way should be picking up the crucial company metrics and making some sort of correlation of how are you doing with the culture and how are metrics being improved. And sharing is about also collaboration and knowledge sharing, because, for example, the end goal is actually making the production environment resilient and very, very easy to update. And of course, it comes to the mutual effort of understanding of how the production stack actually work, right? So here it's very important to include the sharing. How do the companies see that, right? I think it's very different if we if I will go into how in most of the companies the setup works. Of course, people think upfront about the automation. If you're actually going into the job over the job descriptions of DevOps engineers, here you can see the strong emphasis on automation, writing the internal toolkit and things like that. Lean, of course, I mean, I don't think it has been even changed like since like 10 or 20 years ago, right? So it's very important that no one gives you the carte blanche and doing some nice things to the servers of updating and making them up to date if it doesn't bring any value. I think things are missing culture, because most of the setups, even if we talk about the nice word called DevOps and the brave new world, we still see the picture that even the DevOps engineers are becoming at some point are coming into the problem that ops engineers faced like 10 or 15 years ago. The DevOps movement should actually resolve. So there is still the wall of confusion and basically responsibility delegation between dev people and ops people, and there is still there is a straight line communication of deploying stuff or like fixing bugs. So there is at some point it hasn't been changed much. And sharing, so it also comes into the sharing problem that even if you're upgrading your own technologies, people will still think that it's some sort of complex, and this is gonna be the expertise of the one guy or one engineer. And and measurement. Yeah, I also barely saw the configuration when we're talking about like moving to the DevOps approach that is going to be measured somehow, right? So it might not be, it should not be measured at the task or the milestones we've done, right? Because even if you've done like multiple milestones, they might not bring any sense, because like, for example, in the last company I worked on, we were trying to speed up the delivery pipeline for front-end application. At some point, being full of technical debt and like confusion, like we used to deploy the front-end application once per 2 weeks. And during some like work on erasing technical debt and actually elaborating the pipeline steps, we made deployments happen like multiple times per day, if necessary. But we haven't seen any feedback of how did we improve the software development lifecycle, because there are probably still a lot of bottlenecks that didn't make the team happy. So reality, why are we not DevOps yet? And what blocks us from being DevOps? Here I'm going to focus on problem domains, because I think it was partially my bias, partially the bias of the community, that the problem that DevOps is actually resolving is about the problem being exists in a bloody enterprise organization. So it's the problem when the organization is moving slow, and it's being full not only of the technical debt, but of the organizational debt, the corporation's full too. And it's very hard to change the mindset of thousands of employees, especially if you read the white papers of the big DevOps transformations. For example, the transformation of ING Bank from Netherlands, you will see that it comes to be the most blocking factor. But here I also want to point out that the startups also do have this problem. I think at the first stages of startup, it's not necessary to think about DevOps at all, because first of all, you have to think about your revenue, and you've got something to eat. And once you kind of overcome the stage, here comes the problem of scale. How is your organization scaling? And the DevOps as a crucial factor of your organization to scale properly and to scale healthy. People don't know how it works. So people don't know how it works. People struggle with the resource allocation because the DevOps is not the thing that will just happen, right? So you have to put some efforts in order to bring it to the table, and that's something that startups struggle with. So here I'm going to cover my personal experience. So let's say there was a company I joined, and here I kind of look at the picture of as an alternative to Star Wars, when there is a good force as a software developers who are making features, who are trying to refactor code, who are trying to raise technical depth, who are trying to bring some sort of culture forward. But there is a evil force which is blocking things all the time, because so it's actually really interesting how infrastructure becomes the blocker of everything. And let's say we have already the technologies that are working pretty well. So we have Chef to configure servers. We have Jenkins that helps someone to click the button to run some builds and deployments. We have AWS when we're running everything, but still it's being owned, and the expertise is being shared only within the infrastructure team. So it becomes the blocking factor for the whole engineering organization. First thing that you might think about this issue, it's about your technologies are wrong. Your technologies are outdated. There is already the new stack technologies, and who runs his own stuff on this. So you're considering as a approach to get things done, and making lots of milestones in order to achieve the proper way of doing DevOps. You're writing infrastructure code, making it declarative, making it bulletproof. You're implementing human monitoring because it's something that haven't existed before. You're designing the bulletproof CI/CD core, so the deployments are not a measure blocker anymore. You're doing the clear-cut staged QA environments that also didn't exist before, so that developers have some place to test and integrate their own software, that the software actually has some space for mistakes to happen. And of course, everything is on top of Docker and Kubernetes, because in a brave new world, everything runs on top of Docker and Kubernetes, Yeah. So what actually happens? So what happens after we achieved our definition of DevOps? Basically, we updated our technologies and actually kind of forced them to work good for us. But what happens is that we decrease the time between the ops human being and technology, but we haven't decreased the communication time between dev and ops. And that's a problem. And that's a problem technologies are never going to solve. So when we're introducing, given the software that has an API or has some sort of interface to interact with, such as Kubernetes or Prometheus as a monitoring system, people still think it's complicated, but people think it's cool. People really appreciate that there is something moving on, but people still think it's complicated, and they're not going to touch this unless you're applying some efforts to do so. And that's a core problem. And that's a problem that also blocks software engineering from growing and making software on a rapid scale. So it's wrong, because if you're looking into that schema, it might be straightforward, because for example, the infrastructure is still complicated, right? So if we talk about the Kubernetes cluster, in terms of sharing and expertise, it might be tricky. So why can't we just stick on the idea that DevOps is a feature team, such as payment team or the back office team that works on internal product that basically has an expertise? Because if it's more than one person, we will probably think that the bus factor is being is being like erased, right? But what's wrong? Like, why does it still work properly? Why is it still like blocking us? So I think there is a still huge time pressure on platform engineers because as far as I see that most requests are coming to the infrastructure are blocking ones because the platform is something where the groundwork is moving on, and as times are changing, you have to move this groundwork more often. And so, like, if only infra guys can do it, so there is a time pressure being increased for sure. Technologies are scalable, humans are not, as we could see from this schema. I mean, it's of course it's hard to write people. So it's hard to hire people. It's harder to hire right people, and so we could also face the issues such as a burnout and apathy when we're going to be pressured too much. So we're not scalable as technologies are, and so we have to still think about the way our collaboration works and the motivation of knowledge sharing for sure. Because if we're talking about sharing being the core, not just DevOps culture, but basically the company culture, it's still very demotivating when only the one team shares the expertise across some services, which actually I think the services we're running, such as the cloud and the container orchestrations, are basically very important in a company's lifecycle, and it can't be just like stick to the single team. So the happy future, how can we become DevOps? So what can we do? Like, how can we track our progress? So how can we achieve this happy future? When I think about this, I kind of try to make up some schema in mind, the schema of the transition. So how does engineering work, and at what stage is it? Because so, for example, if we talk about like the data-driven approach, there are 5 stages like data savvy, data resistant, and there is a data-driven as the last step. So it will be very useful to think in these terms on a DevOps culture as well. So the first stage is a black box. And the black box under this, I mean that nobody knows what's happening inside the infra. And if something goes bananas, there is only the specific amount of like persons and teams who are going to fix it. The second stage is awareness. And the infrastructure is clear and visible for everyone. So it might not happen that everyone's contributing on it, but at least everyone knows how it works, or at least everyone can look at this when a person wants to. The third stage is a knowledge, when it's basically going to the better approach that the engineers can run and maintain their services they develop and prod themselves, so they know how to deploy, they know how to operate the services, they know how to debug it, they have the production access resources. The fourth stage is contribution. I think it's that's the ideal approach of how should DevOps work. So when engineers contribute to the infra core, such as their code base or platform components on demand. And that's how the last stage looks like. So we don't have evil forces anymore. We have the persons. We have everyone. We have everyone who understands who understands how does the how does the infrastructure work. Everyone knows how to contribute to this, and it's something that most of the engineering organizations called internal open source, when there are maintainers who know how the stuff works and who make sure the service is working very well. And there are users who can contribute by sending a pull request and basically getting some sharing and improving themselves through the code reviews. So I think that's something that that's something that we should give as a last step of like organization capabilities. Platform team. So if you talk about the platform team, we still think in terms that even if we want to come to the ideal approach of DevOps, we still kind of think that we still have the dedicated team for platform components, such as like container orchestration, the monitoring, CI/CD backups, and some other ops tasks. So how should this team work? So I think there are two approaches. There is an outside approach. There's an approach of working outside. There's an approach of working inside. So outside, the way how can we collaborate with dev teams is about the coaching. So I think it's really important to share the knowledge through the workshops and pair programming. I think workshops is more or less general approach. Sometimes workshops don't work very well because the knowledge that you don't use it's actually is just passing by really fast. So it's also really important to take some time on the pair programming sessions so everyone will get the idea how it works. The empathy. So I think empathy is not a news, right? So empathy should come to the most of the jobs that human beings do. But I think it's really important to think about that we should also focus on empathy because if the infrastructure is a groundwork that needs to be touched in a rapid basis, so we also strive to the faster response time. The documentation, I mean, it's kind of might be the ideal to cover, too ideal to cover absolutely all platform aspects, but we should strive to that because I think people are also getting tired answering the same questions, right? So should basically kind of capture what everyone wants to know and document it as well. And as I think as a conclusion to all the work that we do outside of the team, comes with confidence because because one of the things that the DevOps is trying to achieve is the self-confidence of all engineers to safely deploy their software to production to support. Insight. So because if we talk about a team, if we talk about a small organization, we should also think how do we work between each other? How do we split up tasks, responsibilities, and what should we pay attention to? I think that's very important to keep the balance between the technologies, the work we do in technologies, processes, the tech processes we do, and the processes we do, let's say onboarding or backups or upgrading clusters. It's really important to stick to the process so you're making sure your outcomes are more predictable. And the culture, of course, it's something that we're having a talk about. Product team. So I think under the product team, I think that the ops team should be self-sufficient and they should know how can it work, because let's say in most of the, we talk about the Scrum as an approach that most of the software development teams work. I never seen the Scrum working on an ops team, to be honest, because you can't plan ahead for 2 weeks if there's always the urgent stuff coming on, and if your infrastructure is perfect, there are always going to be some hot fixes being made. Roadmap. Also, if you want to think big, but there is a limited amount of time and you can't do everything at once, it's really important to keep the roadmap of improvements and making sure you're moving this roadmap with the time. And stakeholders, I mean, yeah, every product team has stakeholders. You also have stakeholders sometimes as a dev or engineering manager, sometimes as a CTO. So you also have to make sure you work very fine with stakeholders. And checklists. So as I said, I mean, most of the processes are the routine repeatable operations, and checklists really help in order to structure it. And the last thought, I think it's kind of the ideal picture, but I think that after reaching all the technical and cultural capabilities that we could have, if we assume that DevOps is still not a one-time help, it's still something that we have to improve. I guess the company's DevOps transformation will be based on feedback from both business metrics and platform metrics that there is still not perfect that you should fix, and you plan your work and trying to make a correlation between the metrics improvement and the work you do. I think that's a feature that will come after you're fixing all the problems that you have in the DevOps. So that's it. Basically, that's it from my side. If you have any questions, please ask. If you want to get my personal contacts, you can scan this QR code. So yeah, feel free. Thank you.